Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, the Taliban claim they have shot down a U.S. aircraft in central Ghazni province, killing the entire crew and several officials. In a statement, Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid said the jet was destroyed in response to a U.S. raid in the province. The plane, which was on an intelligence mission, was brought down in the Sadokhail area in Ghazni province, the Yak district. The Pentagon says it's investigating the incident. Local officials say initially it was a passenger plane belonging to Afghan airline Ariana. However, Ariana CEO Mirwaiz Mirzaqwal says all of his company's fleet is accounted for. In India, West Bengal has become the fourth state to pass a resolution against the Citizenship Act as the protests against the disputed law continue across the country. Kerala, Rajasthan and Punjab have already rejected the law, which came into effect from 10th of January. Earlier in Kerala, millions of people formed a 620-kilometer-long human chain to protest the contentious law. Elsewhere, women took to streets in Mumbai in a show of anger against the legislation, which critics say is discriminatory against Muslims. In a related development, over 300 eminent personalities, including actor Nasiruddin Shah, have written an open letter against the new Citizenship Act. Other celebrities include Meera Nair, Ratna Phatak, Javed Jafri, vocalist T.M. Krishna, author Amitav Ghosh, and historian Rumila Thapar.
In their letter, the celebrities express solidarity with civilians protesting against the controversial law. The letter reads, "The soul of the nation is threatened as the livelihood and statehood of millions is at stake." It says, despite the government's claim, the law does not appear to be benign legislation only meant to shelter the persecuted. Stating that they're ending their silence, the open letter also stated that they will stand with those who stand for democracy. It also criticized police brutality against students at the Jamia Millia Islamia and Aligarh Muslim universities.
Moving on to Iraq, where 2 protesters have been killed and 75 others wounded after unknown gunmen opened fire at anti-government demonstrators in Al-Nasiriyah. Security officials say assailants attacked the main protest camp in Haboubi Square and set the demonstrators' tents on fire. The main protest camp in the holy city of Najaf was also burned down overnight by unknown attackers. Clashes resumed in central Baghdad as police fired tear gas to disperse the demonstrators. The unrest broke out in October last year with protests against the government corruption. France says 3 of its nationals are missing in Iraq. Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said the government is aware of the 3 French nationals' disappearance, but he said there was no new information on the case. Iraq is currently in a state of crisis as anti-government protests entered their 4th month. Earlier, the U.S. embassy was hit by a rocket attack. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shatayyeh has urged the international community to reject U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Addressing a cabinet meeting, Shatayyeh said the plan is meant to protect Trump from impeachment and protect Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from prison. Trump is expected to unveil his peace plan for the Middle East after meeting Netanyahu and his political rival Benny Gantz. Meanwhile, dozens of activists rallied outside a UN office in Gaza City in protest against the Trump's peace plan. Meanwhile, 2 Palestinian miners have been shot with rubber-coated steel bullets and injured by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. The incident took place after Israeli forces stormed the town of Beth Omer to the north of Hebron. Rescue officials say Israeli forces stormed an area adjacent to the illegal Israeli settlement of Kermit Tsur, provoking clashes. Germany says the UN should pass a resolution sanctioning any country that breaks the arms embargo on Libya. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas made this demand during a meeting with his EU counterpart Joseph Borrell in Berlin. Borrell and Maas discussed how to maintain a fragile ceasefire in Libya. Regarding the situation in Libya, Maas said no one has thought there would be a quick solution. He said the UN should ensure there are consequences for violating the arms embargo on Libya. Earlier, representatives of 16 nations and international organizations at the Berlin Libya summit agreed to stop delivering weapons to Libya. Moving on to Libya, where the UN-recognized government claims Commander Khalifa Haftar has opened a new fighting front in the country's northwestern Misrata city. Officials say Haftar's forces are now advancing towards the city, which is allied with the GNA government. Meanwhile, the UN mission in Libya says Tripoli's Mitiga airport was hit by 2 rockets, wounding 2 civilians. Fighting resumed a week after Libya's warring sides and leaders of Russia, Turkey and the West agreed to a truce and an arms embargo at the Berlin conference. The truce has virtually collapsed with renewed fighting and the UN reports regarding violation of the embargo. In Egypt, a court has handed 37 people jail terms, including the imprisonment for joining or supporting ISIS. The court said the defendants were accused of forming and joining ISIS cells that were active in several provinces, including the capital. 8 defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment, while 29 were given jail terms ranging from 1 to 15 years. Meanwhile, 7 people were acquitted, including Egyptian footballer Hamad al-Sayed. All the defendants pleaded not guilty and can appeal their sentence in Egypt's top civilian court. ISIS-associated militants have been waging an insurgency in the north of Egypt's Sinai province since 2014, killing hundreds of soldiers, policemen and civilians. Lebanon's parliament passed the 2020 budget as the violent anti-government protests continued in central Beirut. Protesters gathered around the building, throwing rocks as lawmakers debated the budget.
Chief of Lebanon's Budget and Finance Committee said the forecast revenues set by the budget are unrealistic. It predicts a deficit of about 7% of the GDP. Some parties boycotted the session, arguing the new government should have first won Parliament's vote of confidence and then presented the budget itself. Meanwhile, health officials said 12 people were wounded in clashes outside Parliament, while 40 others were affected by tear gas. Protesters claim they were pushed and harassed by security forces in central Beirut. They have rejected a new cabinet formed last week and accused the political elite of ignoring their demands.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The number of people in China who have died from coronavirus has risen to 81. Officials say there are now 2,744 infected and nearly 6,000 suspected cases nationwide, with over 30,000 people are under observation.
The disease could spread further after the mayor Wuhan said nearly 5 million residents left the city before it was closed.
There are more than 11 million permanent residents in Wuhan, of whom more than 9.9 million are registered population. The floating population in Wuhan is nearly 5 million. During the Spring Festival holiday, nearly 5 million people left Wuhan because of the festival or the epidemic.
China's Henan province has confirmed its first fatality, an 80-year-old woman. Beijing has imposed limits on transport around China to contain the outbreak. In the meantime, Hong Kong has stopped residents of Hubei province from entering the territory. Pakistan's embassy in Beijing and other submissions in China say they are in touch with the Pakistani community as well as Chinese authorities. With the disease spreading globally, WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus is headed to Beijing to meet Chinese officials. Australia and the US have confirmed their 5th case of the virus, while South Korea confirmed its 4th. France has already confirmed 3 cases of the virus, the first in Europe. Cambodia has also confirmed its case, while India says there are 6 suspected cases.
As the world watches the coronavirus outbreak unfold with bated breath, medical staff in China are risking their lives to contain the virus. More in this report.
The Lunar New Year is supposed to be a time of celebration in China. But this year, the country is struggling to stop the spread of the deadly coronavirus. It has already killed 56 people in the country and infected around 2,000. China's medical workers are leading this fight from the front lines.
Since 29th December last year, we've taken in a total of 604 patients, of whom 154 have been discharged and 31 died. Now there are 423 patients in the hospital. Some of them are already relatively stable, and about 20 to 30 patients will gradually recover and be discharged in the future.
Some of these health workers are veterans of the 2002 SARS outbreak. Many are working despite the fact that they are on leave and might not get another chance to spend time with their families for months.
About 20% of the patients in our hospital are critically ill. Most of them are elderly. They often have multiple primary diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, and coronary heart disease. While we are actively treating the primary diseases, we need to take special measures according to actual conditions.
Chinese authorities are taking every measure possible to stop the virus from spreading. This includes a complete ban on wildlife trade and quarantines in infected cities like Wuhan.
Russia has reportedly concluded the delivery of a second S-400 missile system to China. Russia's military says the handover certificate was signed in China in December. It said the procurement consisted of 2 divisions of launch devices, radio location stations, and energy and service equipment. It said China also received 120 advanced anti-aircraft guided missiles. China received its first regimental S-400 set in the spring of 2018. Meanwhile, the UN has called on the US and Russia to extend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty for 5 more years. The current arms control agreement between Washington and Moscow runs out on 5th of February next year. Under Secretary General Izumi Nakamitsu says that 2 nuclear powers should preserve the New START deal in its original form. In late December, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov repeated Russia's willingness to extend the treaty without preconditions. The Trump administration says there is still time to decide on whether to extend the pact. New START is the last remaining arms control agreement between the 2 states after the US pulled out of the INF treaty last August. It's the final week in Brussels for the 71 British members of the European Parliament. It's a painful time for those British MEPs who believed in the European Union. But for those who believed in Brexit, it's a moment of victory. More in this report.
Labour Party delegation leader Richard Corbett has been a member of the European Parliament since 1996. Now the British Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn's Brexit plans have fallen into place. Corbett's run in Brussels is ending on midnight this Friday. He terms the Brexit campaign that won the 2016 referendum one of the most dishonest in the UK's political history.
I was first interviewed on this very bench 20-something years ago, so to come back here in a way to end it off is a very special moment. The next few days I'm packing up my boxes, I'm making, sadly, my staff redundant. I'm beginning to think what I might do for the future, but I've not decided yet.
Brexit Party MEP Claire Fox has a different take on matters. She says the European Parliament is too inefficient at legislating and sees the unelected European Commission's role in the EU as undemocratic. For her and other Brexit Party MEPs, this is a historical victory for their country.
Of course, I'm pleased because now I feel that people will at least feel the first stage has happened. You know, we will have technically left the European Union, and we decided to do that a long time ago. So, of course, I'm relieved at that.
Pro-EU MEPs fear that with a right-wing government running the UK without the EU's regulations, environmental protection will be weakened and workers' rights watered down. But these battles must now be fought at home, not in Brussels.
Slovenian Prime Minister Marjan Šarec has resigned and called for an early election. Šarec said his minority government could not push through important legislation. He said with this coalition, he wasn't able to fulfill the expectations of the people. Šarec said he will be able to fulfill them after an election. The opposition Slovenian Democratic Party has said an early election was by far the most likely option. It will be Slovenia's 4th early election in a row. Italy's far-right leader Matteo Salvini has failed to overturn decades of leftist rule at an election in the northern region of Emilia-Romagna. With 98% of the ballots counted, Democratic Party Governor Stefano Bonaccini is leading with 51.4% of the vote. Interior Ministry data shows the candidate of the right-wing League and its allies, Lucia Baronzoni, took 43.7% of the votes. Democratic Party leader Nicola Zingaretti said Salvini has failed in his attempt to topple the government. Emilia-Romagna is the largest, most populous and the richest of Italy's red regions. Salvini's bloc did secure a resounding victory in a separate regional election in the underdeveloped southern Calabria region. Bolivia's interim president, Janine Áñez, has asked her cabinet to resign so she can reshuffle the governing body. The presidential office said Áñez will attempt to fill the posts as soon as possible to maintain continuity ahead of the polls. The statement said Áñez believes it is common to make rearrangements in the executive authority team. Áñez pledged to reveal the new cabinet lineup soon. The interim president already said she will run in the upcoming presidential elections in May. This will be a rerun of the disputed vote in October that led to the resignation of leftist leader Evo Morales. 53 people have been killed as record-breaking rains lash Brazil. Officials have expressed alarm over continuing storms in the country. Disaster officials say 44 people are dead in the state of Minas Gerais and 9 others in neighboring Espírito Santo. They said 19 people are still missing. Nearly 20,000 people were evacuated due to the threat of floods and landslides. Rescuers are struggling as several highways have been cut by floods and scores of bridges knocked out. Rainfall in the region has been the heaviest since the records were first kept 110 years ago. Britain's fishing industry suffered from the UK being late to join the European Union in the 1970s. Since then, fishermen have blamed the EU for the decline in their industry, claiming it gave foreign boats generous access to British waters. They hope Brexit will change that, but there are no guarantees. This report has more.
Dawn is still hours away when Davy and his crew set off from North Shields in northeast England. The lights of other fishing boats glint on the horizon, but there are far fewer than when Britain joined the EU in 1973. Davy blames Europe's fish-sharing quotas. Boats from the continent now take 6 times more from UK seas than British boats do from European waters.
Our own fleet surely has to come first. When we leave Europe, we've got to be looking at a bigger picture to get a better, sustainable fishing for our own country. Never mind these foreign lads.
Fishing crews like Davies account for less than 0.1% of the UK's economy, but for an island nation like Britain, they're a symbol of independence.
The trouble is, once again, we've been promised and promised, and at the last minute, they'll sell you down the river because they've got no spine, any of them.
25 the headings. Started 15.
Most of these fish are exported to Europe, making some wholesalers worry that any trade dispute with the EU could be damaging.
On a local level here in North Shields, probably 60% of that would go to the European markets predominantly. So without access into those markets, it would really hit the industry hard.
The EU's trade chief has already suggested fish are up for grabs, saying fishing rights could be the price of British access to European financial markets. In a choice between this tiny industry and the vast city of London, Britain's politicians may sacrifice the economic minnow in a bid to steer the wider economy away from the rocks.
It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. In France, researchers have recreated an accurate 3D print of an 18th century musical instrument at a music museum in Paris. Researchers say the replica will give musicians a chance to faithfully recreate the sounds and moods of the epoch. What about this instrument in this report?
The Music Museum of the Philharmonique de Paris has created its own kind of musical time machine by 3D printing replica period instruments. The result is remarkable. The real star of the experience is an 18th century flute, originally made by Jacques-Martin Hauteterre, a famous maker of musical instruments. Project director Stefan Wiedelich says it is an extraordinary tool for recreating the past.
Going back in time for a musical instrument means being able to create a perceptual phenomenon that for the listener will take them back to an ancient time.
Before fabricating the flute, the Research and Restoration Center at the Museums of France put the original through an X-ray topography to identify its original properties.
For example, you see here the first hole, which has what I would describe as a hat shape. Quite interesting and very important acoustically. And if I look at the same one in the 3D printing, well, I really have exactly the same geometrical shape.
Critics have pointed to the downside. The material being used to make the replica is not the original wood, but very modern plastic.
Pakistan's ongoing economic recovery has helped improve its score in the Economic Freedom Index 2019. A report by the Washington-based Heritage Foundation says the country also scored higher in judicial effectiveness and property rights. It gave Pakistan 55 on a scale of 0 to 100, making it the 131st freest economy on a list of 186. It says Pakistan's overall economic freedom score has increased by 0.6 points. The foundation defines economic freedom as the fundamental right of every human to control their labor and property. The Heritage Foundation, with a close link to the Trump administration, has been publishing the index for the last 25 years. Stocks across the globe are tumbling amid fears over the economic fallout from the Chinese coronavirus outbreak. Stocks of leisure and airlines are taking the heaviest losses. Travel and tourism-related bourses are down nearly 2%, with the sector exposed to a slowdown in the travel market because of the outbreak. British Airways owner IAG plunged 5%, and a luxury brand Burberry dived over 4.5%. London's FTSE 100, Germany's DAX and France's CAC all lost close to 1.5%. In Asia, Hang Seng slipped almost 3%, while Japan's Nikkei was a close second with over 2% losses. Demand for safe haven assets such as Japanese yen and treasury notes are spiking. Meanwhile, China's yuan has fallen in offshore trade to its lowest level in 3 weeks. Time to take a look at the weather situation from Untitled. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.news. Thanks for watching.